one way. That's all we could afford for you, my aunt said, loud enough for everyone at the airport check-in line to hear. Don't make that face, my older sister added. You should be grateful we got you anything at all. I stared at the ticket with my name on it and no return home, while strangers looked away like they didn't want to witness it. Then the gate agent frowned at her screen and said, "Wait. This report doesn't match what your family told us." My name is Naomi Carter, and I was 33 when I finally understood that my family hadn't just abandoned me once. They had built their whole image on doing it quietly, carefully, and with just enough polish to make themselves look generous while doing it. I work in airline operations support and customer documentation now, which means I spend my days understanding exactly how travel records work, what they reveal, and what people think they can hide inside them. I grew up being the dependable one, the family helper, the girl who cleaned the kitchen after everyone else had eaten and went to bed. My sister Renee was praised constantly. Her grades were celebrated. Her moods were managed. Her needs were budgeted for before anyone even asked. I was the one who learned early that asking for too much meant becoming a problem. Money was always described as tight when it came to anything I needed. School supplies, a winter coat, the application fee for the community college program I saved my babysitting money to research. Tight. Always tight. But somehow, when Renee wanted a trip with her friends, when she needed a new phone, when her car insurance came due, the tightness loosened. I noticed. I didn't say much about it then. I was young, and I still believed that love was circular, that if I worked hard enough inside that family, something would come back to me eventually. I was not rich, not polished, not protected by anyone's favoritism. But I was observant in ways they never measured, patient in ways they never respected. And harder to break than any of them ever calculated. That morning at the airport, on the day I turned 18, I did not know yet what I was walking into. I only knew that something about the day felt wrong before it even started. What happened at that check-in counter became the fault line of my life. Everything I am now, every record I kept, every skill I built, every moment of quiet confidence I eventually found, cracked open from that single morning. And they never once realized how much I understood about what they had done. If you grew up feeling like the extra one in the room, the kid whose needs were always the first to get cut from the budget while someone else's wants sailed through without question, I want you to stay with this story. If someone ever made your basic needs feel like an inconvenience, if you were handed less and expected to perform gratitude, this one is going to hit close. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Drop a comment if you've ever been underestimated because of where you started or how little you were given. And click hype or like right now, before the real betrayal unfolds, because what this family did goes much deeper than one bad birthday. They told me the morning of my birthday that they had a surprise. My Aunt Darlene said it with a smile that sat too still on her face. My stepfather Ray was already loading bags into the trunk, bags I had not packed, bags that turned out to be mine. My sister Renee sat in the back seat with her phone out, not looking at me. We drove to the airport. I thought maybe they had planned something small, a domestic trip together, a weekend somewhere, maybe their version of a celebration. I was still willing to believe it could be something good. It was not. They walked me to the check-in counter, and my aunt slid a printed ticket across to me with 2 fingers, like she was passing a napkin. A one-way ticket to a city 3 states away, where a woman named Brenda, a distant family friend I had met once at a cookout, supposedly had a couch I could sleep on until I figured things out. Their message was clear. I was 18 now. I had become, in their accounting, a completed obligation. Renee looked up from her phone just long enough to say, "You wanted independence, didn't you?" My aunt tilted her head. "College? With what money?" And then Ray, standing slightly behind them like he was directing a scene he didn't want his name attached to, said the part that landed the heaviest. "Your sister actually has a future. We had to make choices." I stood there in that line, holding a ticket to a life I had not agreed to, in a city I barely knew, with a woman who was not expecting me to stay long. They had packed my bags without asking. They had chosen the destination without consulting me. They had framed the whole thing as a gift, as a launching, as something I should thank them for. My hands were steady. I made myself keep them steady. But at the check-in counter, the airline employee, a woman with short natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, paused while looking at her screen. Her expression shifted. She typed something, scrolled, typed again. Then she looked up, not at my aunt, not at Ray, but directly at me. "Did you agree to this trip?" she asked quietly. "Because something here feels very wrong." They pulled me aside, and that is when the masks came off completely. My family stood near the rope dividers, and my aunt started talking to nearby passengers in that soft, wounded voice she used when she needed an audience. My sister leaned against a pillar and shook her head slowly, performing disappointment for anyone who glanced over. She always ruined special moments by crying, Renee said to no one in particular, though she said it loud enough that it carried. I wasn't crying. But I understood in that moment that she wasn't describing what I was doing. She was activating a script they had rehearsed about me for years, one where I was unstable, ungrateful, dramatic, difficult. They had been practicing that version of me long before this day. When the airport staff asked practical questions, basic ones, about confirmed housing, about whether I had an adult contact at the destination, about the booking notes attached to the reservation, Ray stepped forward and said it plainly and without lowering his voice. "She's 18 now. She's not our responsibility anymore." People around us heard it. A woman with 2 small children glanced over and then looked away fast, the way people do when they've witnessed something they wish they hadn't. I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with being seen as completely alone in a crowd. But I answered the staff questions clearly. My voice didn't shake. I told them I had not arranged this trip. I told them I had not confirmed housing. I told them I had not been consulted about the destination. I watched the airline employee write something down. That small act, someone writing down my version of events, felt enormous. Then my aunt moved closer and dropped her voice to just above a whisper. "If you don't get on that plane, don't come back." She let one beat pass. Then, louder, "For the surrounding space, after everything we've done for you." The manipulation was so clean it almost had a structure to it. Make the abandonment sound like generosity. Make the victim sound ungrateful for refusing it. I did not board. A staff supervisor guided me away from the counter and helped me document what had occurred. She spoke to me like my words were evidence, not emotion. It was the first time an adult outside my family had done that. My family left. They walked through the terminal without turning around once. I stood and watched them go, and something in me that had still been hoping cracked open and went quiet. In the days that followed, they told relatives I had been unstable. That I had caused a scene. That they had tried to help me and I had refused it. Some relatives believed them. I lost contact with people I had known my whole life because the story traveled faster than I could. But in the silence of that loss, something else began. I started saving everything. Messages. Dates. Details. I didn't fully understand yet why I was doing it. I only knew that their version of me was not accurate, and I was not willing to let it be the only one that existed. What they never calculated was where that airport morning would take me. The humiliation, the documentation, the moment a stranger in a uniform treated my account like it mattered, all of it pointed me toward a career I hadn't planned but that fit me precisely. I moved into airline operations support and customer documentation. I learned the systems. I learned how travel records are structured, what gets flagged, what gets filed, and what stays accessible long after a flight has landed. I became someone who understood that paperwork is not neutral. It carries the truth of what actually happened, even when people have spent years telling a different story out loud. And here is what they were careless about. Ray had a small business. Nothing large, a contractor operation with a handful of accounts. Over the years, details surfaced through family conversations and old messages that I had held on to without fully understanding their weight at the time. Reimbursement claims he had filed that included that birthday trip. Travel expenses billed to his business accounts with descriptions that didn't match what had actually happened that day. Narratives he had repeated to relatives about the costs he had personally absorbed to set me up. Narratives that contradicted both the booking records and the airport report notes that had never fully disappeared from the system. The same people who called me dramatic were reckless with documents. The same people who called me ungrateful were sloppy with lies. They were arrogant enough to assume nobody would ever sit down and compare the stories, match the dates, or pull the records side by side. What they didn't know was that I had spent years learning how records talk when people don't. And the report from my 18th birthday, the one the gate agent had flagged and the supervisor had documented, was still there. When placed next to newer material, it didn't just describe one cruel morning. It outlined a pattern. Her name was Denise. She was a senior compliance manager, 12 years into a career that had made her precise, unimpressed by noise, and very good at identifying what mattered in a pile of information. She noticed me early because of the way I worked. I didn't miss details. I stayed calm when situations escalated. I kept thorough records without being asked to, not out of anxiety, but because I understood that accuracy protects people. She called me into her office one afternoon, not to correct anything, but to ask a question. "Where did you learn to document like this?" I didn't have a clean answer for her then. I just said it had always felt important to get things right. Over time, I told her more. The airport story came out in pieces, across several conversations, the way real things usually do. Then the financial inconsistencies I had noticed, the reimbursement claims, the mismatched dates, the business records that didn't line up with what Ray had told family members for years. Denise listened the way careful people listen, without filling the silence with her own reactions. Then she said something I had not heard before in quite that way. "You're not overly sensitive, Naomi. You're accurate." I had to sit with that for a moment. My whole life, being precise about what had actually happened had been reframed as sensitivity, as holding grudges, as inability to move on. The idea that accuracy was a form of strength, not a flaw, rearranged something in me quietly. Denise helped me organize what I had legally and carefully. She advised me on what was provable, what should stay private, and how to present what was real without crossing into anything reckless. Meanwhile, the family had grown more comfortable with their story. Years had passed. Their version had gone mostly unchallenged. Renee was planning a large celebration, an engagement party layered into a family anniversary event, and the invitation list was wide. I heard from a cousin that my family planned to reference their version of my 18th birthday at the event. They were going to describe how they had launched me into adulthood, how much they had sacrificed, how I had been given an opportunity. They believed they had already won. Their story had been the only one standing for so long that they had stopped being careful about telling it. Denise, when I told her, didn't encourage me to stay home. She encouraged me to tell the truth only where it could be proven, and to do it in a place where their own words couldn't hide behind a closed room. I arrived at the event quietly. Nobody expected trouble from me. I was the one who had never made a real scene, the one who had walked away, built a life somewhere else, and stayed mostly silent. The venue was a banquet hall with round tables and warm lighting. There were extended relatives, family friends, a few people I recognized as connected to Ray's business network. The room smelled of catered food and floral arrangements, and the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the space with the comfortable noise of people who felt safe. I sat near the back. I listened. I waited. My Aunt Darlene stood up first, holding a glass, and the room softened to attention. She spoke about family, about sacrifice, about how they had always done what was necessary to care for those who needed them. The words were smooth. Practiced. Then Renee added her part, that easy smile in place, voice warm and just slightly amused. Some people are still angry because they were given freedom and didn't know what to do with it. The room laughed, that awkward collective sound people make when they aren't sure if something is a joke or a wound. I stood up. The room didn't expect it. My aunt's smile held for 2 seconds, then flickered. Freedom isn't being handed a one-way ticket to a stranger's couch on your 18th birthday with no return, no housing confirmed, and no one asked, I said. My voice was level. I had not rehearsed anger. I had rehearsed clarity. I laid out the timeline without rushing it. The ticket. The airport report the gate agent had flagged. The supervisor's documentation. Text messages from that morning. And then the reimbursement records, Ray's business filings that included that birthday trip as a legitimate travel expense, with descriptions that directly contradicted what had actually taken place. My aunt's voice came first. You kept all that? You called me dramatic, I said. I became detailed. Ray pushed back from his chair. This is a family matter. Not when fraud and lies pulled strangers and business accounts into it, I answered. Denise, seated at my table as my guest, spoke next in the calm, measured tone of someone who had spent years explaining documentation to people who wished it didn't exist. She walked through the record chain in plain language. She confirmed what was provable and named what the records showed without embellishment. There was no way to dismiss it as emotional or confused. It was organized. It was dated. It was real. The room began to shift. I could see it happening at the tables, the slow turn of recognition on faces, relatives quietly connecting what they were hearing now to things that had never fully added up before. The college fund that had apparently existed for Renee but never materialized for me despite early promises. The stories that had changed slightly depending on who was being told. The way my disappearance at 18 had been described to different people in ways that didn't quite match Ray's business contacts stood quietal. And moved toward the exit in that polite, wordless way professionals do when they realize they are sitting in someone else's exposure. Two of Renee's friends leaned toward each other. My aunt tried once more to redirect the room, but the moment had already moved past her reach. Renee's composure cracked just slightly, not into tears, but into that particular stillness that comes when someone realizes the version they have been performing no longer has an audience willing to receive it. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask for an apology. I had not come for a confrontation built on emotion. I had come because the truth I had been carrying for 15 years deserved to stand in the same kind of public space where they had first tried to erase it. I left the banquet hall before the evening finished. The air outside was cool and I stood by my car for a moment, not because I needed to collect myself, but because I wanted to feel what it actually felt like to be finished carrying something that heavy. It felt quieter than I expected. Not hollow. Just still. The family was left to manage what remained. Ray's business relationships required conversations he had not planned to have. Relatives who had accepted the polished version for years began asking questions that didn't have clean answers anymore. My aunt stopped being the steady narrator of family history because people had seen what her narration left out. Renee's engagement celebration was not cancelled, but the room it ended in was different from the room it had started in. I did not celebrate any of that. What happened to them was a consequence of choices they had made across many years, and consequences are not the same as victory. Justice, when it finally arrived, did not look like revenge. It looked like being believed. By people who had known us both. By professionals who reviewed the records without sentiment. And most importantly, by myself. The 18-year-old girl who stood at that airport counter holding a ticket she hadn't agreed to had spent too many years believing that the family's version of her might be partially true. That maybe she was too much, too sensitive, too difficult to help. What I know now is that she was none of those things. She was accurate. She was observant. She was standing on the beginning of ground that would take years to build but would eventually hold. They gave me a one-way ticket out of their house. They never expected it would become my way out of their lies. If you've been pushed out, handed a dressed-up humiliation and told to be grateful for it, if someone in your family quietly made you the one that the resources didn't quite reach, this story was for you. Subscribe if you know what it feels like when people rewrite cruelty as help. And drop your story in the comments. If someone ever tried to exile you, embarrass you in public, or make you feel like needing basic care was asking for too much, I want to hear it. You are not dramatic. You are accurate. Click hype to help this story reach someone who needs it tonight. Standing up for yourself is tough. If you've been there, subscribe and become part of this community. Let me know this story helped by clicking hype. And tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel.